Okay, I lied again. The last time I talked about this book, I lied. Last time I talked about the Silver Eyes, I said I got to a certain point in the story, and I got to around the point when Charlie was going to Fredbear's and learning about her, like, long-lost brother, and that was a lie. I didn't realize how early that part actually happens. I thought I had only read up to the point where Charlie's learning about Fredbear's because that's the last thing I remember. While I was reading though, I realized, hey, why are there so many highlights? Then I realized I read so much further into the book than I thought. I just didn't remember about 90% of it. Apparently, I had actually read up to the point where Charlie and her friends are in Freddy's trying to save Carlton from Dave, aka William Afton, which is like almost the ending of the book. And I still can't remember if I actually finished the book the first time or if I stopped literally at the end. But anyway, what did I think of the book? I loved it. It's not winning any awards or anything, and I know that, but I loved it anyway. I actually almost want to buy the second book despite my absolute hatred for what it looks like. I really just want to read more about Charlie and her friends, but the Silver Eyes actually had a really solid ending, and if it weren't connected to FNAF like as a whole, I'd say this was like a perfect ending to the story, with only a few loose ends that could be tied up in another book, or probably could have been fleshed out in this book. That's not counting Charlie's 3 closets that hint at her being an extremely realistic robot clone. That might need another book. No, not that book. A much better book. I'm trying to be a little more open-minded about it, but how do you introduce these after the more classic horror derived from the old animatronics in The Silver Eyes? The Silver Eyes felt very retro and, dare I say, perfectly captured the horror from FNAF 1. This unease and fear of these living things that shouldn't be alive. I love seeing how Henry's work actually affected Charlie as a kid, and I felt like it was pretty realistic. Most of the work he made for her, she loved and cherished, but the animatronic in the shadows, the one with the silver eyes, scared her even to the present day. It was the same animatronic that her father used to kill himself. I'm just not a huge fan of the graphic novel. I really don't like the art style, and I feel a lot more attached to the book version of the story. But in the last video we left off with the group going to the ceremony for their friend Michael, but right after that a whole bunch of lore gets revealed. I think it's where things really start to ramp up. So the group hangs out a bit and Charlie and John get closer and start investigating some things on their own. And Charlie ends up telling John about her brother Sammy. She only has a vague memory of him, but they try to use that to navigate to the original Freddy's restaurant, Fredbear's. If you remember from the last video, I said this is where I left off in reading the book the first time, but now we know that was a lie. But I think I remember it so well because it was the thing that really stuck out the most to me. It was the peak of mystery in the book so far. We were actually at Fredbear's. This place we only ever hear about in lore videos was actually getting explored by the main characters. This was crazy to me the first time I read it, and I think it was just as intriguing the second time around. Also, if you could just bear with me if I make any mistakes, please. I finished reading this book on a plane ride to Florida, and I'm sure you can understand it might be a little hard to remember all the details after, you know, flying to Florida, which was like over 12 hours of flying, arriving, going to things like Disney, and eventually catching the Big Sick, and then flying back for another over 12-hour flight. My memory's a little hazy on the small details and placement of events, so I'm sorry if I get stuff wrong. Anyway, if I'm not mistaken, they find a yellow suit there. Very spooky, very cool. Everyone even a little interested in FNAF knows a yellow suit means there's some juicy lore. And it was also close to this time of the book where John also tells Charlie that he remembers something from the day that Michael went missing. He remembers one of the animals, a yellow one, leading Michael away. Again, this was crazy, an actual witness to one of the children's attacks. He didn't see him get killed or anything, but he saw a purple guy doing his purple guy thing. Things keep progressing in the story, and the group eventually goes back to Freddy's. This is when things really kick off in terms of action. They end up having a run-in with the security guard and convince him to join them rather than rat them out. As they're exploring though, the guy seems a little suspicious, like he knows the place too well. Things end up going wrong, and Carlton, the comedy guy of the group, goes missing. After a lot of police not believing the distressed teens stereotype later, we find out that Carlton was a little messed up growing up. He played pranks similar to this, and other pranks that were borderline cruel, messing with people's emotions, etc. Was this just another prank like his father suggests? Of course not, the security guard is purple guy. And he has Carlton trapped in a springlock suit, which he explains very creepily deep in Freddy's. The gang eventually all arrives and are now at the hands of Afton and the animatronics. And just like it's explained in the games, the animatronics protect children, but the friends weren't children anymore. They're just some young adults trespassing in their space. The struggle they go through to free Carlton and try to survive is great. Very well done. There's a lot of hiding, getting taken by surprise at the worst moments. It was so much fun to read. All the while, Charlie faintly hears a music box. After some time, the group is eventually met with a golden suit that looks just like Freddy. Carlton recognizes him as Michael. The struggle continues, and eventually Afton has Charlie by the throat, but Charlie retaliates. Charlie says to Afton, who's wearing the Springtrap suit, "If you want to be one of them, then be one of them," as she sets off the spring locks. This was such a good line. I absolutely love this. So good. It might be a little cheesy, but I feel like it was fitting. I liked it. William Afton dies the same way he did in FNAF 3, which is one of my favorite FNAF games. But did he die? Or is this like every other time he's died? I have no idea. Maybe it says in the next book. I don't know. My guess is he didn't die. He already had massive scarring from being trapped in the springlock suit previously, which he explains to Carlton, and also he needs to survive to make the next book or game or whatever it is. On its own though, this was a great ending to a book about a serial killer come back to haunt the traumatized friends of one of the victims. And on its own, I think this book is pretty great. I love it as its own thing. I do however think this book is amazing when you're a fan of FNAF and get all the references. If you don't know much or anything about FNAF, Fredbear's is just another restaurant that Charlie's family owned. The yellow suit they find is just some old animatronic suit. Maybe that's kind of cool as like a mystery old animatronic, but mostly I think it's just an old suit. Names like Michael and things like Springlock suits are just names for people and things. Something they did amazingly though is the build-up. This book perfectly nailed the type of horror that original FNAF was. At times the characters are like trapped in these small spaces fighting for their lives, and you can really feel that. I really felt like there was a sense of danger, and I cared enough about the characters that I was exhausting myself hoping for their survival. The fear of these living robots is so prevalent too, which is good because that's what FNAF is. It's the main horror in FNAF. From the very start of the book, we can tell there's this unease surrounding Freddy's, and the animatronics are a big part of that. And despite Henry making these amazing robots for Charlie, there's always one that terrified her. We know there's something wrong with them from the start, but we don't know how wrong. And this fear only gets worse when they're exploring Freddy's, and Marla's little brother, Jason, starts seeing the drawings on the wall moving and coming to life. This place seems too alive, even to Jason, who is a kid, and kids have pretty active imaginations. Then the crescendo when Afton accompanies them to Freddy's and the animatronics start glitching out, and then they break free from their stage. The lead up to this was so well done, and the supernatural aspects just fall together in a good way. It wasn't too abrupt, and it wasn't shown too soon. One of the big rules of horror is to show as little of the monster as possible. They weren't in Freddy's long, and they didn't experience too many ghostly encounters. It's a massive payoff for a FNAF fan when we get to the end, and it's revealed why the animatronics act the way that they do. Because the children Afton murdered never left. Their souls were still there in the animatronics, and their bodies were still stuffed into the suits. These are things we see glimpses of and are hinted at, but now we're seeing it, and now our characters need to survive it. Damn, it gives me chills, really. Like I said, I love this book, both as a FNAF fan and as its own standalone, piece. I mean, it's nothing to call your English teacher about, but as a story, it hits almost all the bases for me. The development of this book was a big deal for the FNAF community. Before it released, I remember there was a lot of hype, and before it, our only way to navigate the lore was through a couple of frames that we see in game, and from the teasers we saw on Scott Cawthon's website. Now we had an entire novel to set things straight. And did it do that? No, of course not. If you paid attention to any of my sarcastic remarks, FNAF never makes any sense. This book and the whole trilogy of books raised more questions and caused more issues than anything. And it led to these books, which continued to cause issues and raise questions. So many things contradicted the existing game lore and led the theory community to string together just whatever they could find to make the tiniest amount of sense. All that being said, I might have liked reading this just as much as I liked playing the games. I love the games, I really do. Well, most of them. But Charlie's story throughout the book, and the mystery and the resolution, it was just great. I love this as a standalone book, and it might be on par with the games for me. Maybe even a little bit more, if you want to consider the weird turn that the lore has taken recently. But what do you guys think? Did you enjoy the Silver Eyes? Did you even read the Silver Eyes? Let me know if I should read the next books, maybe even make a retrospective on them too, or let me know if it'll totally ruin my experience with this first book. And lastly, if you want to see me do a whole rewrite for the FNAF book trilogy where I try to de-twisted one cyborgify the whole thing, basically make it more FNAF 1 and less whatever this is. Also, this is my first time doing one of these retrospectives, so if this is nothing like a retrospective you've seen before, I'm sorry. But I want to make more videos like this, so any tips would be greatly appreciated. Something else that would be greatly appreciated is if you bought one of my shirts from the Nostalgia Corporation. It's my clothing brand based on the idea of nostalgia. If that's your thing, it's the first link in the description below. I'm loving the videos recently, and you guys seem to be liking them as well. But I promise more gameplay is coming soon. Until then, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this. Stay tuned for the next video. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.